Alpiran, thank you for having me. Hello, everyone. Good evening. Yes, it's really great that Alpiran started this course as well. Alpiran has been both close to me and our student for a long time, and even though he is still very young now, just last week he gave a seminar at a high school and offered advice to high school students. That's wonderful. This was something I really wanted. So I want to congratulate Alperin once again on this matter. One of the things I always tell him is that we grow by giving, not always by taking. One of our fundamental philosophies in Sufism is not to take, but to give. We always think that we add something to our bag by taking, but in fact we add something to our bag by giving. Of course. Just as everything needs balance, like drinking water needs balance, or a fruit needs balance, there also needs to be balance when giving, just as there is when eating fruit. Because the balance of giving and receiving is also one of the laws created by the Creator. But first, we will think about giving. We will think about giving first. When we focus on giving without expecting anything in return, the Creator will open our path. On this occasion, I congratulate Alperin once again. Thank you, teacher. Thanks to you. You're welcome, no problem. Have a safe journey. Alperin also shares some great advice. You can follow me on Instagram. His name is Alperen Mustafa Aydın. Yes, he's coaching today. Ask questions like, how does our mind work? What should our perspective on coaching be? And in this journey of life, how can we use coaching techniques both for ourselves and for others? We will focus on this. And in part of the session, we will have a Q&A segment. May this lesson be beneficial for all of us in advance. There is very little time left before we enter the month of Ramadan. I would also like to congratulate you on Ramadan in advance. I hope that during the month of Ramadan it will be a time when we can turn inward and spend time alone with ourselves. Of course, there is a saying among the Sufis. They say, consider every visitor a blessing, consider every event a blessing, consider every night as the night of power. Just as we should treat every night as the night of power, we should actually treat every month as if it were Ramadan. But especially during Ramadan, there is a moment when people focus on a single point and the energy is higher. Let us appreciate the value of this as well. I wanted to remind you of this on this occasion, and I wanted to congratulate you on your Ramadan in advance. Yes, I will start with a nice slide for you by clicking share like this. All right, let's get started then. Life coaching. First, I'll give you a coaching perspective test. What's the first thing that comes to mind when you hear the word coaching? I want an answer to this question from you. You can also write gang. I'll read it from the chat too. When you hear the word coaching, what comes to mind when you hear the word coaching? He mentioned companionship on the journey. Nurhan. Yes, he said travel companion, travel guide. Ida said a guiding light. Uslam said to reach out. Semra said she was a guiding light. Emerald mentioned guidance. Saren said she's a guiding light. This is how I see it. Bushra said to provide support. Latichi said guide. Uslam said to provide support. Gul said to change oneself, and Yamur said non-judgmental support. Kader said a guiding light. Hatis said companionship, accompanying, moving forward together. Kevza said listening without commenting, being there for someone. Hatish is companionship. Ignore is about supporting individuals in the path they choose based on their own decisions. Hülya is the guide. Nilüfer Kıvılcım, Özlem, helping to heal. Teaching, she said. Gülten Yoldaş is a guide. Nur is about supporting those who walk the path to find themselves. Yes, that's great, thank you. Now, why did I call this question the coaching perspective test? Because people don't see coaching as it is, but through the lens of their own personality. No matter what we do, each of us has a character. Look, each of us has a character. Even if we have the same parents, every sibling has a different character, right? Some are introverted, some are extroverted, some tend to talk more while others tend to be more silent. And for example, let's say you are 3 siblings or 5 siblings. All 5 of you might have different ways of helping others. Look, you were all born to the same parents. In fact, as you know, even identical twins born from the same egg, develop very different personalities from each other. Their perspectives, their attitudes toward helping others can be different and varied. Why did I specifically mention this? Because each of us has a certain tendency. When you are coaching someone, no matter what your profession is, and even if we take the same lesson, even if we learn the same sentences, even if we receive the same hours of training, our character still shapes it. Helping, the way we help, the way we offer help, the way we coach, all of these change. And it's very important to recognize and accept this. For example, let's say there are some people who have a more motivational character. They speak louder, there's a light in their eyes, they excite people. They generate an energizing force that somehow motivates the other person in the other person. For example, who is an example of this when we look at the field of coaching in the world? For instance, it's Tony Robbins. Tony Robbins has an approach, a type of character that energizes the person in front of him. And even if he presents the same information, he presents it in a way that motivates people to take action. For example, Virginia Satir, who is also a well-known family therapist and part of his team, shares the same information as Tony Robbins. But because she has a calmer nature, even when she shares the same information, her approach is more thought-provoking. For example, in my own approach, people often haven't heard some of the things I say for the first time from me. But when they hear it from me, it creates a path that is more relaxing for them, that leads them to turn inward and helps them connect with their inner peace. Even if we do the same thing. For example, we look at who among the famous people in this field are there? Joe Dispenza. He, for example, looks at it from a different perspective. We're looking at Eckhart Tolle, author of the book The Power of Now. He was very famous at one time, you know. He, for example, has a calmer nature. He has a more introverted approach. So what we see is this. Here I also gave a few examples. If you express this with the word help in your mind, it means you have a more compassion-focused nature inside. If you express it as guidance, you have more of a tendency to show direction and take responsibility within you. If you say companion on the road, it means accompanying, progressing together. Look, for example, with companion on the road, there is a bit more movement involved. I also use this term a lot. If you say leadership, for example, direction, assigning direction, establishing a system and guiding are more dominant in you. That's why, even within coaching, different fields have actually started to emerge over time. For example, there is executive coaching, sports coaching, student coaching, and life coaching. Now, for instance, with a very calm-natured approach, sports coaching may not be very feasible. Or when you do executive coaching, you might need to have some leadership qualities. When we do student coaching, your approach is very important depending on the student you are working with, because young people can react in very different ways. So think about the answer you give. What kind of way do I help people when I am helping them? Am I someone who is always giving? Am I someone who always takes responsibility? Or do I have a side that withdraws when I don't get a response? Do I cut people off quickly, or do I give the other person too much credit? All of these will unconsciously shape our approach when we are coaching others. So what was it again? For example, what was written at the entrance of the Delphi temple, one of the first temples of philosophy? It said, know yourself. What was Yunus Emre's poem that we all know by heart? Knowledge is knowing knowledge. Knowledge is knowing yourself. If you don't know yourself, what good is all this reading? That's why we start from the very beginning, from the basics. If you don't know yourself, if you don't know what kind of structure you have, your approach, if you don't know your identity, then you also can't know how to act. That's why everything starts first with knowing yourself. When I first started as well, of course, I just gave an example from Alperen a moment ago. I started at a very young age with this. But when I say a young age, I was still 21 or 22 years old. But of course, especially for this field back then, it was considered a young age. Because in order to be in a position to give advice, people expected you to be a bit older, for your hair to have a few gray strands. society, actually not much has changed even now. For example, ask people, ask them about a wise person prototype. Say, for example, in a novel, I'm writing a story with a wise character. There's a wise character in it who gives advice. In your opinion, what kind of person is this wise character? How old is he? What does his face look like? Usually, what they will describe to you is mostly an old man with a white beard. It's like this all over the world. By the way, it's not just like this for us. In our subconscious, experience equal age, there's a kind of coding like that. But there's a beautiful saying, he says, time ripens pears, not people. We learn about life not by aging, but by living. That's what he says about life. Of course, there are many valuable things that age brings to all of us. This can never be denied, but you don't become wise just by getting older. Otherwise, you would find more wisdom in coffee houses than among sages. Along with age, you also need to have the ability to interpret and the ability to be aware. When these two come together, something magnificent emerges. For example, how do you make pilaf? You might say with rice. But it's not just made with rice. You also need a pan. We never think about that, do we? You need a pan, you need fire, and you also need oil. It's the combination of all these things that creates it. If all you have is rice but no pan and no fire, what are you going to do with that rice? Just like this, age, experience, and awareness only gain meaning together. What does it say? It says life doesn't begin after 40, it begins after awareness. That's why this point is so important. Of course, when I started back then, I already had a background in Sufism. Naturally, I did. But somehow I also got into coaching. After all, when you look at it, Sufism doesn't really mean anything as a profession, but there is a field called coaching. So I took its trainings. I was one of the first in Turkey. At that time, there was only 1 or 2 people in this field anyway. And naturally, you adopt models. But then you realize something. You are not the same person as the one you model yourself after. First, you need to adopt that model, then define your own character, and only if you build something on top of your own character does something unique and special emerge. That's why every journey fundamentally begins with knowing yourself. Please reflect on the answer you gave today. Let's continue. We will look at the word coach. Now, I'm going to talk about this a little bit with you. 15th. It originates in the 15th century. It comes from the town of Koç in Hungary. But in the town of Koç, the first carriages resembling our horse-drawn carriages were produced. Of course, this was of great importance at the time. It became easier for people to travel from one place to another. People traveled from one place to another. They traveled on horseback, they traveled on foot. But these horse-drawn carriages allowed you to carry heavier loads and to ride along with more people. At first, it was used in the academic field. Then, those who helped students achieve success were called academic coaches. Then it started to spread into the fields of personal development and sports. We can also see its development through visuals like this. In the town of Koç in Hungary. Then, in the academic sense. After that, it continued in the fields of sports and life coaching. Now, I attach great importance to etymology. I always say this, whether I'm training students in the field of Sufism or in the field of coaching. You need to know etymology. To put it in a slightly different way, you truly need to know the historical roots and fundamental origins of the foundational vocabulary, words, and concepts you use. If you know this, then you will gain a much deeper and more comprehensive understanding of it. Comprehension is a very important thing. Otherwise, it just becomes a meaningless word for you. Coaching. So what have we seen, for example? I'll elaborate on this a bit more. The fundamental origin of coaching is actually about moving people from one place to another. Now, in our subconscious, this conceptually means something different. For example, let me give an example from a Sufi perspective. There is a concept called murshid, right? So what is its equivalent today? Murshid, master, teacher, mentor, guide. Now, where does the word murshid come from? It means the one who guides. What does the one who guides mean? So, someone who brings a person to maturity. Where do we use the word mature, Rishit? For example, we say that when a person turns 18, they become able to make their own decisions, sign contracts, get married, obtain a driver's license, and make certain decisions on their own. In other words, they have become mature. So when we understand it this way, what does murshid mean then? A murshid is the person who brings someone to maturity. In this context, of course, I mean it in a spiritual and psychological sense. In other words, the person who enables a student to think for themselves, make their own decisions, and no longer be dependent on their teacher. So what always happens when we listen to the stories of saints? If you pay attention, when the teacher feels that their student has matured, they say to them, "My child, you have now ripened, matured, you have become complete. Now the time has come for you to leave this lodge. Now you should go and chart your own path." In other words, a spiritual guide is actually someone who does not make a person dependent on themselves, who liberates them and enables them to become their own teacher. But if I had defined it with this sentence now, it would have meant something different in your mind. But when I explained it with the etymological meaning of the word, when I talked about becoming mature, then it took on a completely different meaning. Again, for example, student, to be a student. It was a very beautiful word, an even more pleasant word than learner, because talebe means the one who seeks or the one who desires. So look at what it has taught us. Our ancestors taught us that knowledge is given to those who seek it, not to those who do not seek it. Yunus Emre has a very beautiful poem. "I did not come for a cause, my work is for love. The home of the friend is in hearts, I came to build hearts." He says, "I am a merchant, I have many goods, I came to sell to those who want to buy." In other words, first a person must want to receive, only then can I offer them my goods, that is, what I have. That's why, for example, I consider the word student, seeker, very important at this point, because to someone who does not want to receive, even if you offer them all the knowledge in the world, sometimes this question is asked. It is said, for example, "While I am able to help everyone, I can't help those closest to me, my child, my spouse." If there is no request from them towards you, no matter how much information you offer, nothing will change. Because knowledge is given to those who seek it. That's why it must be requested. So, what does this mean? Knowing etymology helps us both to comprehend and understand events better, and also to convey them more effectively to others when presenting. From that perspective, then, what was coaching? A vehicle that carries a person or people from one place to another. So coaching is not about teaching, not about correcting, not about saving. It means accompanying someone in their transition from one place to another, in terms of its origin, its original source. That's why from now on, take notes on these fundamental concepts today. Whatever topic you are explaining, research its etymological origin. In the past, it was very difficult to find these things. When I was a child, when I first became interested around the age of 15, back then, when it came to Sufi topics and other subjects in the field of personal development, we always had to look them up in dictionaries. Now there are etymology dictionaries. On the internet, you can directly learn all the roots of words from there. And here again I presented an example as a visual aid to help us remember. 15th. In the 15th century it spread from the village of Koç to Europe. Then the word Koç evolved and evolved, eventually reaching these forms. Now what about coaching and a psychologist? What is the difference between people who offer a psychological approach? Let's focus on this a little bit. Here I set psychiatrists aside a bit, because a psychiatrist is also a medical doctor. Yes, they are also interested in this subject. But in general, I will try to explain the difference from the perspective of a psychologist or a psychological counselor. What I am saying here does not express strict rules, because nowadays these fields have started to overlap a lot. In the past, especially during Freud's era, psychology was much more rigid. The approaches were much more radical. For example, Freud viewed the human body like a machine. That's why when something was missing, and Freud was also a neurologist at the same time, actually his area of expertise was neurology. He later became involved in psychology. And just as you would check if there is a malfunction in a machine, let's say a car has stopped. Did it run out of gas? You put in gas and it goes. If not, is there gas? You check the engine. You check its temperature. You fix the technical parts and get the engine running again, or the vehicle itself. This is the kind of perspective that started to emerge towards the human brain, towards humans as well. It started to manifest. So how was it being examined? For example, we look at the hormones that make us happy, or the secretions that are released. Serotonin, let's say oxytocin, dopamine, and the excitement-inducing adrenaline. If a person is unhappy, it means there are some problems with serotonin reuptake. So, if we make some changes with certain medications or supports to increase serotonin, the person will be happy. Or, for example, the loss of desire for life, the provision of dopamine, oxytocin, and so on. But all these medications, all this research has shown that humans don't work this way, because humans don't function exactly like this. Over time, psychology also began to evolve, and spiritual aspects started to be included in psychology. For example, especially in the last 20 years, in the field of transpersonal psychology, that is, more spiritual methods have started to enter the field of psychology. Again, in the field of cognitive psychology, philosophies rooted in Eastern philosophy have begun to enter the field of psychology. We can see this. For example, I am not only knowledgeable in Sufism, but I also have a good command of Eastern philosophy. Ever since my childhood, I now see that in the subfields of cognitive psychology, methods from Eastern philosophy are increasingly being explained. These techniques, which were once belittled as the human soul is being discovered, and as it is realized that the human soul is not a machine, that the human body is not a machine, there is now a greater turn towards the East. That's why I see this. No one can deny the contribution of medicine to people's well-being. I'm definitely not talking about that, but the human soul has different needs. For example, gratitude, giving thanks. Surrendering to a creator, these are very different things. For example, today in England, a ministry of loneliness has been established. By the way, I also write for the Sunday column of Sabah newspaper every Sunday. There I usually write about psychology with a focus on scientific studies. One of the articles I wrote in recent weeks was about this. Loneliness has started to increase so much that while the human population is growing incredibly, loneliness is increasing 3 to 4 times as much. Because all of us need affection, surrender, and to form bonds. That's why no matter what you buy these days, medications, TV series that distract us, television, sugary foods, none of them can meet the needs of our soul. For that reason, I will make comparisons in the field of psychology. But let me also say this again. This field is starting to become increasingly intertwined. Coaching is more future-oriented. Psychologists and psychology focus more on the present and the past. In other words, they approach it from the perspective that the reason for your current behaviors lies in a problem from the past, and they aim to change that. Some coaching systems do this as well, but their main purpose, their primary goal, is future-oriented. They say, look ahead, because they say you can't walk forward by looking back. They say, if you try to walk while looking back, you'll trip over even the smallest stone in front of you. This is the fundamental perspective in coaching. For example, it always works on a goal. There is always a focus on a goal. It is said that even if you don't give the human brain a goal, it will inevitably seek out goals. That's how the human brain works. If you don't give him a goal, he'll go and find the goals that impress him. If you set a goal, it will unconsciously always work towards that goal in the background. It is aimed at improving performance. Coaching again, because we're all aware of it. There is potential for performance within us. We can't bring this out Actually, most of the time, our problem isn't not knowing, it's not being able to take action, or even if we do, we have trouble maintaining that action. Then, it works with healthy and functional individuals. So, when does a person usually go to a psychologist? Generally, when we look at the world as well, it's when that problem makes it so that the person can no longer maintain their daily life. For example, all of us might have various obsessions, like checking the stove before leaving the house, or wondering, did I forget my keys? Or we might have certain cleaning routines or sensitivities. But when these start to affect our lives, when it reaches a point where it interferes with our way of living and starts to get completely out of our control, that's when it slowly progresses toward a state of illness. Then psychologists work in areas like decision-making, finding direction, and motivation. As I mentioned earlier, psychology comes into play in situations where you can no longer control yourself and your problems are preventing you from maintaining your life. Generally, that's when people seek help. Coaching, on the other hand, is always focused on looking forward. Because it says the best thing about the past is that it's over. You should look ahead. If you try to fix everything, sometimes you waste time, sometimes you get tired and you lose momentum. They often use Mevlana's perspective as well, by the way, especially recently. Both coaches and psychologists. By the way, I'm not saying this for Turkey, but abroad. For example, one of Mevlana's books became the best-selling book in America in recent years, Essential of Rumi. We see, for instance, what does Mevlana say there again? You set out on the road, and the road will appear to you. As you start, walk on the way appears. This is, for example, a very famous saying in America. What does he say? You set out on the road, and the road will appear to you. Don't overthink, don't overanalyze. These things prevent you from taking action. They can cause you to fall into a state of inertia. That's why you should take your step and keep moving forward. In fact, this is a coaching perspective. In the future, when I have time, I also want to go into more detail about the similarities between the coaching perspective and Sufism and how it can be interpreted from a Sufi point of view. That's something I aim to explain. Now, for example, let's proceed with one of the fundamental perspectives of coaching. This is what we call a belief cycle. What does cycle mean? Actually, when you start from one side of the cycle, it also affects the other sides. Now, basically, this belief cycle explains the following. Like this. Or I will emphasize it. Now it says, your belief, if we talk about the percentage, for example, let's say you have 30% belief, then it says you will use 30% of your potential. In other words, you will use 30% of your existing potential. You will take action at 30% and the result you get will also be 30%. It tells us, let's erase this. Yes. If your belief is 70%, then you will use 70% of your potential. You will take action at 70%. You will get 70% results. Now we know this cycle is how life works. If we believe somehow, but I want you to know that this is exactly how it works at its core. But sometimes in life we experience something where, for example, we start with action first. This could be a situation related to what life brings. Sometimes we start with the result, sometimes we start with potential. I'll give you an example now. For example, let's say you don't believe that you are successful in mathematics. Because you don't believe, you only believe 10%. Your potential is also 10%, the action you take is 10%, and your results are also 10%. One day, let's say you attended a meeting about mathematics somewhere, randomly. A professor there asked you a question, and you answered it correctly. He said to you, your mathematical genius is really good. You just worked with the wrong teacher. They didn't express you correctly. Their approach to you was wrong. The answer you heard from that professor at that moment affects you so much. In other words, an action has taken place there. 70% of the result you get from that action there affects your outcome, changes your belief, changes your potential, and suddenly all the cycles start to change. That's why, for example, in the coaching approach, this belief cycle is used like this, but I don't believe I can do it. Okay, maybe we can't make you believe just out of nowhere. Sometimes when you take action, you find yourself just doing it. For example, you say, I don't know anything about playing basketball. I have no skill at all. Or about playing tennis. You pick up the racket or the ball. You see that you're throwing better than a few people around you. Then you realize, oh, I actually know a little bit about this. Now, I'm going to refer to Mevlana's saying. You know how he says, set out on the road and the road will appear to you. Sometimes you can't develop your belief just by sitting where you are, on your own. Take action. Maybe when you do, you'll reveal the talent within you. Maybe you'll do something you've never done before, and when you do it, an incredible result will emerge, and this will also affect your belief. For example, we adopted this approach from a classic coaching perspective. So, when approaching you, we didn't say, what's in your past? What problems do you have in your life? Come on, let's solve this. Let's work on it for 1,000 sessions. All right, there are places where that can be worked on too. But what did we do now? From Mevlana's perspective. We said, you set out on the road. Who knows what will be born before the sun rises? You take action. New suns will rise before you. Always look at it from this perspective. What does he say? For example, he says, on every horizon where the sun rises, there is a road leading to hope. Isn't that a beautiful approach? He always urges us to take action, because we get to know ourselves on the road. So, what does he say? Again, let's look at Shams Tabrizi. Thinking about where the traveler will end up is nothing but a futile effort. You are only responsible for thinking about the first step you will take. He says the rest will come naturally anyway. Look at what kind of approach this is. An approach focused on the future, an approach focused on action. Again, a Sufi saying, you set out on the road and the road will be open. Look, what a beautiful approach once again. Therefore, the perspective of looking forward, defining yourself on the path and discovering yourself along the way is already both functional and the approach of coaching, which is aimed at self-discovery, is actually the same as the approach of the Sufis. Now, it is fascinating to note that the very first professional coaching system in the entire world was actually built upon the ancient foundations of Socrates' philosophy. That's why we'll take a look at Socrates' fundamental perspective and how he thought. Socrates is an interesting personality. Today I will briefly tell you a bit about his life as well, but I recommend that you do your own research. Just as with etymology, just as we need to research the origins of words, when you research these people, you will see how fascinating their lives are and how intertwined the philosophies they developed are with their own lives. In Socrates' logic, there is this. Throughout his life, he does not teach, he reminds. It's not about giving answers, but about drawing the answer out from within. He doesn't give direction, he helps others find their own direction. His approach is always about enabling the other side to find their own truths and realities by themselves. Did you notice how much this aligns with the perspective of a spiritual guide that I explained to you earlier? That's why coaching was originally conceived not as someone who tells you what to do, but as a perspective that supports the path a person walks with their own decisions. Now let me provide you with a concrete example. As I previously discussed in our conversation, you can only fully and deeply comprehend how a person's philosophy was born when you truly know their entire personal life story and background. I always say this. No matter whose book you are reading or whose training you are attending, first try to learn their life story. Because if you learn their life story, you will understand what they explain later much better. Because all of us in life go through certain difficulties, certain We have gone through storms, hurricanes, and earthquakes. Sometimes the people we love the most have betrayed us the worst. The people for whom we made the greatest sacrifices just walked away. We encountered things from places we never expected, from people we never expected. We faced unexpected behaviors. But while all of these wounded us, they also made us grow, taught us, and helped us develop. That's why those who developed these philosophies and approaches also surely went through countless hardships. Take Freud, for example. Read about his life, and you'll see all the things he went through. He was actually a person who suffered a lot. He witnessed the war period, lost his daughter, and during the time he lost his daughter, he couldn't even attend her funeral because of the Spanish flu. Then there were the pains he endured, and so on. Now, once you have become familiar with his life story, his complex personal relationships with women, for example, you can more or less begin to understand and interpret the various theories he put forward. So it turns out that this is why he developed such an approach. For example, Freud has an approach called the repetition compulsion. He developed it based on observing his own grandchild playing a spool game at home during the war period. That one. In fact, in some theories, it's also referred to as the spool game or the repetition compulsion. I even wrote about it in one of my articles in Sabah newspaper. If you search for repetition compulsion Hakan Menguç, you can also read that article. One of these people, for example, is Viktor Frankl. Logotherapy means therapy of meaning. Now, many people know about this, they've read about it, watched videos on YouTube, bought the book. But I ask, for example, do you know Viktor Frankl? Do you know what kind of life he lived? Do you know how he developed logotherapy? He has an incredible story. I'll briefly tell you about it. At the age of 37, Viktor Frankl was a psychiatrist, by the way. 2. In the years leading up to the outbreak of World War II, during the oppressive era of Adolf Hitler's regime, he and his entire family were forcibly taken from their home and sent to a brutal Nazi concentration camp simply because of their Jewish heritage and identity. By the way, understanding what these people went through in these Nazi concentration camps, or how they managed to survive despite everything, offers huge lessons about human psychology. That's why, for example, the largest and most painful camp is the Auschwitz camp in Poland. If you ever have the chance to go in your life, you absolutely should. Or if you go to Europe, the first camp is in the city of Munich, Germany. It is the Dachau camp. You should definitely see these places. I've traveled a lot, and every time I went, I always tried to understand what people experienced there, what they went through. For that reason, this will also help you grow in another way. He stays in this camp for 3 years. Look, 3 years is not a short time. Bread and water were given in very small amounts. People were reduced to skin and bones. I was going to put photos here, but I decided not to. Later, and in these camps, his father dies of starvation. His brother dies. His pregnant wife dies. It's not an easy thing. And as a psychiatrist, while he is in so much pain in this camp, he observes people. And he says, normally, when I'm living my normal life, people are simple. Even when they experience a minor problem, they can't go on with their lives. They use antidepressants. They say, I can't live. They say, I'm going to commit suicide. People are like this. How can they survive in such conditions, in the cold and hunger, when they're just skin and bones? Then he discovers this. When people find a meaning in their lives, when they find hope, they can endure even the greatest suffering. For example, he talks about this in his book. By the way, I recommend that book to all of you. I'm typing out the full name of this incredible book in the chat for you right now. It is called Man's Search for Meaning, and it was written by the renowned psychiatrist Viktor Frankl. It's a very thin book, and at the same time, it's a very powerful one. So, he talks about something like this. As New Year's approaches in September, October, and November, a rumor starts to spread. They say that on January 1st, on New Year's Day, they'll release us, they'll set us free. No matter the circumstances, everyone endures with the greatest resilience. But when January 1st arrives and they are not released, deaths begin to occur one by one. Because their hope starts to fade, their sense of meaning begins to disappear. And that's where he develops logotherapy. He realizes what people are capable of when they find meaning, how strong they can be. And after being released at the end of 3 years, he turns logotherapy into a system. And today it is one of the strongest theories among psychological theories. Now, if you don't know this story, does reading about logotherapy still have any meaning? That's why knowing the story is just as important as knowing the etymology. Let's do the same thing now. Let's also look at Socrates' story. BC, he is born. BC, in the 460s. His father was a sculptor, his mother a midwife. This is very important. Keep this in mind. So his father looks at a block of marble, and from that block of marble he creates a work of art, a figure, a human figure, an animal figure. His mother was also a midwife. In other words, she is the person who helps one living being be born from another. We will see this later, how it affects his life. He never writes a book. He never establishes a school. He even participates in war. Why did I write this? Because war means facing death. It means witnessing the death of loved ones. It means seeing a side of life you never thought about. And a person often reaches true maturity only after great suffering. It's as if it's like the breaking of a shell in some way. Sometimes that deep pain shows you something you couldn't see before. And then at the age of 70, he is condemned to death. Because he spoke out on every subject during that time. Naturally, some people, since it didn't suit the system or the order, he too was killed in some way. Unfortunately, he ends his last days in this world badly. Socrates says that making people think is important, not giving answers. Because giving answers is temporary, but making people think brings transformation, he says. He says that making someone think allows them to find their own truth. As you can see in this part, what I expressed here is not about giving people answers, but about making the answers emerge from within themselves, he says. Where did he actually get this from? He got it from his mother's perspective. Not giving people answers, but making the answers emerge from within themselves. Let's continue. After establishing this foundation, we will focus on developing the skill of asking questions. And I will give you a set of question templates. And these question templates will be accompanied by a ready-made presentation of 30 questions for you to use and practice with. Our colleagues will deliver this to you. I've prepared ready-made questions, so you don't have to write everything down, because the questions are prepared so that you don't have to think about which question to come up with or focus on generating questions at that moment. Instead, we will focus directly on the impression the question creates on the other person. Let's start like this now. Now, in the Socratic method, there are 4 types of questions. Questions that probe definitions. Questions that catch contradictions, questions about causality, and questions that open up alternatives. Let's take a look at these now. Here's what questions that probe definitions look like. Now, from a coaching perspective, let's say someone comes to you. They say, I want to be more successful, I want to be happier. He says the first thing you need to do is ask, what does success mean to you? Ask that question. What does happiness mean to you? Ask that question. Because if we don't understand what the other person means by success, we can't guide them. For example, let's say someone comes and says, I want to feel full. Would you give everyone the same meal? I mean, someone who weighs 120 kilos, an athlete, a wrestler. Would you give the same meal, the same portion to someone who weighs 55 kilos? You know that the meal you give to someone who weighs 55 kilos wouldn't even be enough to satisfy the hunger of the other. In the same way, when people talk about concepts like success, happiness, or peace, we need to understand what those mean to them. Sometimes people set such high standards that these standards are unrealistic. That's why they can never reach them. For example, what is success? They say. You ask them. And they say, being able to do this and that at the same time, playing this instrument, being perfect at painting, doing this, and accomplishing all of it within 2 years. Now, you can't do all of these things at the same time. And because they can't, they'll believe they're a failure. First, you need to change their definition of success, break down their goals and perception of success into parts, and approach them with a realistic perspective. For example, what is happiness? For me, happiness is feeling good every moment. By the law of life, you may not be able to feel equally good at every moment. In fact, you can't. Sometimes you're way up, sometimes you're down, sometimes you're neutral. Life is like a heartbeat. Up, down. No encounter is ever a coincidence. I gave such an example in my book. I said that if your life has ups and downs, it means you are truly living. But if it's flat, if nothing is happening in your life, be careful. It might mean you're dead. Because what was it? On EKG machines, what does up and down mean? It shows that we are alive. A completely flat line shows that the person is not alive. For this reason, the nature of life is full of ups and downs. For example, in Sufism, acceptance is also a spiritual station, a level. That is, just as you accept happiness, just as you accept the sun, you must also accept cloudy weather. Just as you accept summer, you should also be able to accept winter. That's when something entirely different happens. That's why, when someone approaches us with a definition-questioning inquiry, the first thing we do is ask. You're telling me this, but what does it mean to you? In other words, it means explain this to me. With questions that catch two contradictions, yes. For example, someone might say, I value myself a lot. The greatest value I give in life is to myself. But then they start telling you about their life. They help everyone. In fact, they never help themselves. Whenever someone has a problem, they rush to help, but they haven't paid attention to their own health, their clothing, or their self-care. That's when you point out the contradiction to the person in front of you. Look at this, you say this, but you don't do it for yourself. I always express this. Valuing yourself is not just about expressing it in words, saying, I am valuable, looking in the mirror. It's not about telling yourself how beautiful you are. Your clothing, your attire, dressing comfortably, being pleased when you look in the mirror, being able to accept yourself as you are. For example, now I'm about to start this lesson. So I get dressed. My clothes are ironed. I have my lighting. I also put on perfume, for example. There's no one else here. You won't be able to smell it. But this is something I do anyway. First and foremost, it's not for you, but because of the value I give to myself that I'm going to talk about this topic. I should dress well, prepare properly, put on my perfume, wear my nice scent, and only then should I show up. Look, this is a very important detail. This comes from the value you give to yourself. That's why you should pay close attention to these subtle points, these small details. If a person's behaviors are only directed toward other people, then this person doesn't pay attention to anything at home, doesn't show any care. When someone comes over or when they are in front of others, they try very hard to appear attentive. You can tell that a person values themselves by how they behave when they're alone. Unfortunately, as a society, from the past until now, we have always been raised to feel worthless. It still exists even now. It was even more common in my childhood. There was a guest room. For example, no one would go in there. Why couldn't we go into the guest room? Or there would be a display cabinet. Plates for the guests, forks for the guests, meaning we should be more important than the guests. We should come before the guests. We should value ourselves. Of course, we should also give them the best value. But if we forget ourselves while valuing them, that's the real lack of value. Feeling valuable doesn't come from saying, I am valuable, I am valuable. It comes through actions. That's why you should pay attention to these details in people's lives. Ask this both to yourself and to those people. Thirdly, causality questions. This is what I pay the most attention to. Now, I attach great importance to this. Because in causality, I see this. I can see whether a person can sustain a behavior or not. Now, the vast majority of people are constantly asking, how are we going to do it? I say, if you truly understand deeply enough why you are going to do it, you will eventually find a way to figure out the how on your own regardless. Now, people will come to you with a wide variety of different goals and aspirations, like, I want to be successful, I want to pass the exam, I want to open a new place for myself, I want to open a boutique, I want to do this, I want to do that. You will ask, why do you want to do it? Why? If someone can't immediately give you between 5 and 10 answers when you ask them why, know that they won't be able to sustain it. For example, let's say, and this happens to me a lot, people say, you play the ney so beautifully. And I say, I want to learn the ney, I want to play the ney. So I ask, why do you want to play the ney? Well, it's just that the sound is nice, it's a pleasant thing, end of story. I mean, is that really listening to the ney? It's very beautiful, but when you start playing in your first few months, you won't see that beauty. You'll run out of breath, you'll get dizzy, your lips will hurt, your fingers will hurt, and your back will ache because you're tensing your body. It's those reasons that will keep you going during that process. Majnun wanders the deserts calling out for Layla. It's not the desert or the sun that burns Majnun, because he has very powerful reasons. Those reasons prevent him from feeling the heat. Those reasons keep him from seeing the obstacles on the road. And since we're on the subject and Ramadan is approaching, they ask me, for example, if you were to explain Sufism, Tasawwuf, with a story, how would you tell it? They say, I always tell this story. One day, Majnun was wandering the deserts calling out for Layla. He passed in front of someone performing namaz prayer without noticing. As you know, there is a rule, a belief about this. If someone passes in front of a person performing prayer, it is believed that their prayer is invalidated. The man, upset that his prayer was ruined, went after him and grabbed him by the collar. He said, Hey man, couldn't you find anywhere else to walk in this vast desert? Didn't you see me? He said. And he replied, Hey, he said, I didn't see you because I was lost in love for Layla. But you, in your love for God, how did you see me? He said, It's both a great lesson, thought-provoking, and a beautiful story. Yes, it's 10 o'clock. Let's take a 10-minute break, a pause. Get your tea and water. Then we will continue. See you in 10 minutes. Yes, hello again. Let's pick up where we left off in our lesson. We are continuing. We had stopped at causality questions. So, as I said, I truly understand whether a person will maintain a behavior, a goal, or an ideal by whether or not they can list reasons for it. A person may want to quit smoking, and in fact, most people who smoke already want to quit. But why do you want to quit? Yes, there are some stock answers. No, there also needs to be emotion behind those memorized answers. The person may not always be able to form proper sentences when giving you these reasons, but you should be able to sense the emotion behind those sentences. That's what's important anyway. Otherwise, they could just memorize and recite a bunch of things from a book to you. Or they might form sentences that are hard to understand, but there is an emotion behind those sentences. You can sense the determination behind that reason from the emotion. That's why I give a lot of importance to questions of causality, and I always ask them, why does someone want to reach their goal? And when you listen to those reasons, you realize you can do it too. Yes, the fourth type is questions that open up alternatives. These are meant to get the person to look at things from different perspectives. Now, this is typical of Eastern philosophy, including Sufi philosophy. The approach is generally always like this. One day a farmer comes to Mevlana. He says, I've been ruined, my life is destroyed. He means psychologically. What am I going to do? Help me, I'm unhappy, it's like this and like that. Mevlana says, sometimes troubles pour down on you like rain. But remember, the colorful rainbow appears after the rain. Look, he gave an example based on something the farmer knew. This is a story that is both attributed to Shams and also appears in the Masnavi. So someone says, my whole life has been turned upside down. And he replies, how can you know that the bottom of your life won't be better than the top? Now, when giving this example, when giving it to a farmer, it has a different meaning. This. Farmers turn the soil upside down every few years to moisten it, to aerate it, to revitalize it, to bring it to life. It's even done in small pots. Isn't that the case from time to time? Why? They turn it upside down so that life can begin again. Look, in the example given to him. How can you know that the bottom of life won't be better than the top? Sometimes you want to change things. You want it, it doesn't change, you try, it doesn't change, you do everything you can. But that upheaval, the apparent upheaval, sometimes leads to the birth of a new life. So what did he say? Mevlana? If something you want happens, that's one blessing. If it doesn't, look for 1,000 blessings. Who knows what it's protecting you from? He said. And as I mentioned, these 30 questions to be used in coaching will be shared with you anyway. In fact, if I can find them now, I'll share them in the chat section in a bit. Or Alperin, if you have them, go ahead. I'm not going to read these one by one now. We'll just quickly go over them. After that, we'll move on to the Q&A part so I can take your questions. So, what was the first one? As you may have noticed already, they were questions aimed at understanding. For example, is what you call happiness temporary or permanent? So it's about questioning their definition of happiness. Here is the difference between what they say and what they do. They say, I have complete confidence in myself. I don't have any trust issues. But then they tell you about an incident. Their whole life is built around seeking approval from others, or they fall apart when they don't get it. For example, you point out this contradiction to them. Here are causality questions. Why do you want this? Is this really your own desire? What will achieving this goal bring you? How might this thought be protecting you? Causality questions like what need might be behind this behavior? Questions that open up alternatives. When making this decision, what influenced you? What would someone looking at this situation from the outside see? There is also an approach like this in questions that open up alternatives. This became a bit famous with Gestalt therapy, but it's actually a method that has been used for a long time. You place two chairs facing each other, and first, as yourself, you ask a question to the opposite chair, a question you cannot solve. Then, after getting up and sitting in the other chair, you imagine a mentor in your mind related to that issue. This could be Mevlana, or it could be Fatih Sultan Mehmet or Mustafa Kemal Atatürk. And it's a very interesting thing, our brain, as if it were someone else. When it starts thinking, it gives the answer to that question. This is actually a situation that is often encountered among actors as well. For example, Al Pacino is one of the best actors in the world. He's an actor who played legendary roles in many films, starting from The Godfather in the 1970s. There, the character an actor portrays their self-confidence. For example, everyone finds Al Pacino charismatic. But if you look at it, for example, if you ask people how they would describe a charismatic man, maybe they would say, well, he should be tall, he should be like this or that. But if you look at Al Pacino, he doesn't have most of those traits. He's short. But charisma is something completely different. It's something that overcomes height, that overcomes looks as well. But the movie Scent of a Woman, for which he won an Oscar, is a very beautiful film. So if you haven't seen it, it's one of those movies you absolutely must watch in your life. And there's also an incredible performance in that film. He plays a blind man in Scent of a Woman. And with his performance in that film, he wins the Oscar. There's a video of his Oscar acceptance speech on YouTube. Watch it. He tries to read his speech from paper. He's an actor who memorizes pages of scripts. Yet he tries to give his thank you speech from paper, and even there he gets nervous, because there he is present as himself. Sometimes the reason we can't help ourselves is that when we are present as ourselves, we can't do it. But when they tell you, for example, like you are him, you're Jacobs in this movie, you're Andrew in this movie, then he reveals himself completely. This chair technique is also interesting in a way. When you try it, you'll see that while you can't come up with an answer sitting in this chair, the answers will flow when you sit in that chair. Make sure this is an exercise you try yourself first. This is also one of the examples of alternative perspectives. And I also added extra questions about self and identity. I also included questions about values and beliefs. Yes, and a total of 30 questions. I added them for you to use. And let's quickly wrap up our lesson about the questions here. Now let's take your questions, so if you have any, I can answer them. There is a hand-raising system. On Zoom, if you ask your questions through that, I will give you the floor in order. Yes, let's start with Hülya Özmen. Hello, but your microphone is off. If you turn on your microphone.
Yes, sorry. I turned on the camera, but I forgot the microphone. That's right. I got a bit nervous too, Professor. Yes, this is my third class with you, Professor. We've started life coaching training since December. So about you, like you said yourself, just now in class, you said to think carefully about something you're curious about or interested in, or something else important. Like, is this suitable for you or not? So starting from there, just a moment ago when I was browsing the media, I got curious about your age and such. I wanted to look it up for the first time. It's our third class, but then I saw, oh, I said, Professor, you're actually 10 years younger than me or so. Anyway, I was really curious about what exactly you studied. It doesn't say exactly. What exactly did you study at university, Professor?
Well, I studied different departments, but the conservatory is my main field. Actually, I studied music.
Because there it says social sciences.
It says I went there too. So I have a story that's even more than what I've written, but I don't really want to mix things up too much. My interest actually started long before that. Later on, since I decided that I couldn't study the departments I was interested in here in Turkey, I didn't continue in those fields.
I see. So you say you went back to the conservatory a lot? Yes.
Since I also see music as a form of therapy, I advanced in that field.
So honestly, teacher, I also want to learn to play the qanun. I've reached the age of 50 now, but whenever I pay attention, you said something like that. I'm not entirely sure myself either. It sound really relaxes me, and there's no age limit to learning anyway. Of course, it's not just for relaxation, actually. I mean, I want to learn it maybe to have nice conversations with friends or to host gatherings as well. But, I'm a bit hesitant when it comes to self-confidence. What would you say about this? Will I be able to do it? Will I be able to handle it later on?
Now, don't let age hold you back at all here. I know many people who started very late, both with the qanun and with other instruments, and your age isn't even late. I know people who started after the age of 75. This is just a prejudice, like the idea that learning an instrument later in life is difficult. Learning an instrument later on is not difficult. The biggest reasons people can't learn later in life, for example, why do we learn faster between the ages of 12 and 17? One reason is that we have much more free time at that age, because learning an instrument really requires a lot of time. Let me put it this way. When I first started playing the ney, I used to practice 8 to 9 hours a day. If you add up those 8 to 9 hours with the breaks, you end up dedicating 12, 13, even 14 hours a day to an instrument. I also play the piano, by the way. I spent just as much time practicing piano as well. You just don't get that kind of time anymore. And back then, our beliefs were more positive too. At that time in front of us, there weren't attitudes like, you can't do this, or you're just not talented. Society also believed you could learn. That was the perspective people had. After a certain age, it's not like everyone thinks learning is difficult. Like I said, remember, set out on the road and the road will reveal itself. Start a qanun course now.
Yes, and our music teacher says, of all things, you've chosen the most difficult instrument. He says, teacher, He says, if you had chosen an easier one, by the way, I am also a teacher. I said, well, it's important to succeed at something difficult. People discourage you like this. Thank you.
It's not like that at all. It's not difficult at all. Every instrument has its own level of difficulty. The Kanun is not a very difficult instrument at the beginning, so learn it comfortably.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Goodbye. Yes, let's continue with Ms. Özlem.
Good evening, teacher. You started our presentation like this. You said that our coaching style changes according to our character. However, the characters of those in front of us or our clients can also be different. As coaches, don't we need to adapt ourselves to them?
Of course we do, but this shouldn't exceed 40%. Otherwise, we simply can't be successful. I mean, now, inside me, let's say I don't have a motivator, a motivational approach within me, and the other person is only motivated that way. How long can I keep this up? I can only make my own character more lively for them. I can make it livelier, closer to motivation. But if they keep demanding this from me all the time, then we can't be a cure for everyone. Our energy just won't match with some people. Some people simply won't find exactly what they're looking for in us. That's why we should only adapt ourselves up to 40% according to the person in front of us. We should preserve 60% of our own personality, character, and approach. As a matter of fact, I wholeheartedly support this idea at this point in time. All of us can shoot videos. You can record on your phone and upload it to YouTube. If you have a YouTube channel or an Instagram account where you talk about various topics and people come to you after watching your content, this problem disappears. Because then, when that person watches you, they already feel this. They say, my energy matches with this person, so you eliminate that problem at its root. But before, they wouldn't have known this at all. In that case, they might imagine you as a different personality in their mind, and sometimes you might turn out exactly as they expected. Sometimes you might not turn out as they expected. When I first started, before I had any videos, I used to experience this problem. For example, there were people who would say things to me back then. For instance, someone might have said, I thought you would be a more energetic and lively person. But after sharing videos, that person already sees you. They more or less know your energy. Since they come with that expectation, this problem is completely eliminated. You're welcome.
No, not at all. It is no trouble.
Yes, that sounds good. Let's continue our conversation with Ms. Alive.
Teacher, the greatest kindness is the one you do for yourself. I set out on this path for myself. You mentioned addictions. Yes, I smoke and I am addicted. I can understand every emotion, but I couldn't understand this feeling of addiction. And there are many addictions along that path. When we do coaching, this comes up a lot as one of the problems we will face. How can we overcome this?
Thank you. You asked a very good question. Now, at the root of our addictions, when we look at it in terms of the hormones released by the brain, we see dopamine. We see the dopamine hormone most effectively. This is the number one reason for addictions. Then comes serotonin. Now, all of us get filled up in life. We go through some troubles, we get burdened. You know what I mean? I mean, even when we're working on something nice, sometimes we get so caught up that we end up exhausted. And all of us need some healing. That is, we need to relax. For this kind of relaxation, we need to develop certain rituals. If we don't develop these rituals ourselves, we end up becoming dependent on the rituals that society, advertisements, cinema, and capitalism teach us. And unfortunately, these rituals often have material effects. For example, one of these is smoking. So the cigarette. Since the 1900s, cigarettes have been imposed as a means of relaxation in movies, and even now, if you turn on a series, well, I guess in Turkish series, you don't see it anymore because it's banned. As a writer, I also make a point of watching series adapted from novels around the world. I'm observing, seeing how a novel I've read has been adapted, so to speak. It's always like this. At the character's most troubled moment, they take a drag from a cigarette, for example. An incredible expression of relief appears on their face. Our subconscious picks up on this. Of course, nicotine in cigarettes really does have an effect on the body. Whenever we need relief, we naturally gravitate toward that lower right. And once we fall into its grip, it just drags us along. Now, we said that we all need this. For example, I don't smoke and I don't drink alcohol. So how do I find my relief? By playing an instrument. For example, whenever I'm tired, I always come and play the piano. That's how I unwind. I have certain rituals of my own, like meditation. When the sun comes out, sitting in the sun, like a gratitude meditation. But these, they require some practice. If you don't know how to play the piano, going and playing it won't relax you. If you don't know how to unwind, or if you haven't meditated for a while and haven't developed the habit, you can't immediately get into that meditative state. That's why when you quit smoking, you need other rituals that will help you recover and relax. These could be things like learning to play an instrument, drawing a picture, going to a marbling workshop, a jewelry making workshop, a prayer bead workshop, engaging in some form of art. You need to learn this as a ritual, as a means of relaxation and healing, and make it a part of your daily relaxation routine. If you don't do this, the brain feels an emptiness. During the process of quitting smoking, the brain, because it needs relaxation, and naturally, what happens? It gets drawn back there. It gets drawn back there again because it has been getting that for years. There's also a nice video on YouTube about this. It's called The Easy Way to Quit Smoking. It's a video that provides a psychological perspective on smoking. It's also quite old, by someone named Alan Carr. I think he smoked more than 3 packs a day for over 30 years, then quit. He talked about this. There was a video about an hour long, maybe it's still available. I mean, it definitely still exists, by the way. You can watch it. But basically, as I said, you, me, all of us need rituals. Among Sufis, there are various chants and rituals they practice every day. We all need this. If we don't do this ourselves in healthy ways, we unconsciously get pulled toward what society, our parents, and our environment have taught us. Pay attention to this. Think about what I've said. All right.
Okay. Thank you, teacher. You're
welcome. Take good care of yourself. Yes, let's continue with Nagihan. We can't hear your voice. Sorry, it's gone right now. Nagihan, I'll take you for the next one as well. If you raise your hand again, let's continue with Kader. Hello.
Teacher, I wanted to ask something. I'm doing network marketing. I'm already on social media. I share videos on Instagram and TikTok. I've also opened a page about coaching. But what else should I share? Or how can I introduce myself? Or how can I make a start there? I wanted to ask you these for your advice.
Yes, thank you. This is a question from an area I know very well.
Super.
As someone who is well known on social media, the first thing you should do is a Q&A. So, for example, you can share a post, a single post. You can say, you can write the questions you want to ask me under this post, or if you don't want your name to be visible, you can send me a private message. Then I'll say, I will answer your questions. Make your first videos as answers to each question. For example, let's say someone asked, for example, I want to wake up early in the mornings. How can I do that? Or I don't have enough friends. How can I make new ones? Make a separate video for each one, for every question, and make sure to state that as well. For example, say one of our friends asked this question, now I will answer it. Then people will start asking you questions, and they'll know that they can ask you questions. They'll see you as someone who answers questions. They'll recognize that this is part of your personality and character. So you demonstrate this as well. And through the way you answer, they form a connection with you. They'll think, yes, this is the kind of person with the energy I want, the approach I want. That's why you should start with question and answer sessions.
Super. Thank you very much.
Very nice. Take good care of yourself. Yes, let's continue with Ida.
I turned it on, but sorry.
About that. Okay.
One moment, Ada, let's mute you for now. I'll bring you in shortly. Yes, Nage. I
Just touched the wrong place a moment ago. Sorry, it's my first time joining. Let me introduce myself. I've been a Parkinson's patient, using medication for about 15 years. I have young onset Parkinson's. I'm having trouble with dopamine. Because of this, I was doing quite well when I was a teacher. But lately, after 15 years, I've started to experience some difficulties. I struggled to cope with stress and have been away from teaching for about a year. I joined the civil service, but it's still going on. So my problem with coping with stress continues. I use levodopa, but that frequently proves to be insufficient because it is limited by the fact that it has an initial activation and processing period. When it's over, I'm over too. In fact, I can get demoralized very quickly. Right now, my tremors have started. I'm not having fun. I'm sorry. You can probably tell from the trembling in my voice. I'm sorry. For example, I am currently employed at a local elementary school right now. When I enter the principal's office, my legs just give out and I fall down. A friend of mine interpreted it like this. She considers herself a healer and says this about herself. She said, it's actually a feeling of worthlessness, or rather, a sense of worthlessness in the face of authority. I mean, I don't know, I feel bad, or maybe it's because of things I've experienced or seen with previous principals, I don't know. I really don't like entering the principal's office, my tremors start. At that point, I can't cope with stress. Recently, I started taking antidepressants. I had to because my sleep pattern got disrupted. For example, at night, because my illness makes me tense and my sleep pattern is disturbed, I started using sleeping pills. Right now, I'm at the last hours of the medication's effect. That's why the medicine isn't working. I'm sorry. I don't know how I'm going to find ways to cope with this stress. I mean, I don't know how I can coach myself through this. What do you think about this?
By the way, how old are you?
Actually, I am 48 years old.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Now, of course, when it comes to Parkinson's disease and its progression, you absolutely need to continue with your doctor. The issue of continuing your medications. That's a relationship between you and your doctor. First and foremost, never neglect this. Basically, as we know, and as you mentioned, Parkinson's disease is caused by a lack of dopamine. But of course, how much of this is psychological and how much is physiological is, again, a matter between you and your doctor. I can only talk about the aspects where I can help you with the psychological part of this. And actually, you touched on many topics. Each of these can be explored further. Topics. The excitement you feel when you enter your manager's office. Yes, unfortunately, sometimes in our childhood, they presented authority figures to us in such a way. Situations like trying to be flawless in front of authority or striving to be perfect in front of authority have always put us under stress. And this somehow continues in our lives. Of course, there are various exercises and so on related to this. They exist, but first you need to calm your excitement and reach a general state of relaxation. I've prepared Sufi meditations about this on YouTube. I'll even share one of them in the chat right now. In fact, let me say it was a coincidence. I've also prepared a new Sufi meditation. I just recently filmed that one as well. I think I'll upload it to YouTube in about 10 days. That one is also about surrender. You'll see it on YouTube when I share it too. Now, I've posted the link to this Sufi meditation in the chat section. And for those who can't access it through the chat, if you search Hakan Menguç Sufi meditation on YouTube, there are several meditations available. Listen to this for 21 days. Allow some of the words and advice in it to settle into your subconscious. This will change some of your perspectives because your perspective needs to change permanently. Follow these for a while. Earlier, I didn't mention this often in this course. I personally reply to the messages on Instagram. I've always been the one to check them. No company has ever managed them, nor have we ever had anyone running our social media. So even after you join this course here, If you have a question or if you want some guidance, if you write to me there, I can gladly reply and suggest a video you can watch or something you can do. First, I recommend starting with these videos.
Thank you very much. By the way, since you mentioned art, I actually experienced this art thing out of necessity during the pandemic. During the pandemic, I was on paid leave and I was really bored at home, so I joined karaoke programs. On one of the karaoke programs right now, I've sung more than 6,000 songs. I checked recently. Honestly, singing increases my dopamine production. It boosts the release of dopamine, natural dopamine. Art truly takes a person to completely different places. Then, let's continue.
On.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Hope to see you on Instagram.
God willing. Goodbye. That's very interesting. Something just came to my mind. I wrote an article and I wrote it recently. I mean, it hasn't even been a year. I wrote an article about what increases dopamine. It just came to my mind at the very last moment. I'm sharing that with the group as well. This too, by the way, I did a very comprehensive research on this. I mean, you can't really find it disorganized anywhere else. Let me put it this way, there's nowhere else you can find it like this. So I shared it in the chat section. What increases dopamine? We all need dopamine. Remember, dopamine is the joy in our lives. Yes, let's continue with Ida.
Good evening. This is my first time joining a class with you, so maybe you've already answered the question I'm about to ask, but I don't know. That's why I'm going to ask. Now, all of us here are taking the life coach course. We're interested, we're involved, but can we all really do this? So is everyone open to this? Or when and how will I be able to recognize this distinction in myself, that I can do this? Does it mean I need to have a very strong sense of empathy? Or is it about being very talkative? What will make this distinction? For example, in my normal life, when I feel very happy when I benefit people in society. For example, just a moment ago, I wished I could find a sentence to say something to my friend Nargen. I really wanted a spark of inspiration, but honestly, I don't know if I could actually do it. Like, at what moment, yes, could I be a life coach, or what qualities do I have? What would make someone say, yes, you could be a life coach? Maybe you've answered this before, I don't know.
Yes, you've asked a very good question. First of all, it's very important to answer this question. Maybe a lot of people are asking themselves this question. Am I suitable? What qualities do I have? Can everyone who participates do it? Statistically speaking, not everyone who participates usually does it, nor do they continue. This isn't just the case here. People also don't continue when they start learning an instrument. So a life coach, how can we tell if someone is suited to become one? Here's what I say. Social sciences, psychology, psychiatry, I include psychiatry in this as well. Life coaching is the same way, and philosophy too. I think all of these are, in a way, talents similar to being an artist. For example, we can understand this very well in music. We say, for instance, someone has a talent for music or that they took a talent exam. I think that before someone becomes a psychologist, unless they're going to be a researcher, that's different. But for those who will have one-on-one relationships with people, these individuals should also go through certain talent assessments. Because this is an art. Because this requires being able to empathize with the other person, to perceive them, and to be able to share the knowledge you've gained so far with enthusiasm and desire. If you don't have these qualities, no matter how much knowledge you acquire, you won't be able to reach the other person. I mean, for example, what kind of skills do you need to have? First of all, you need to be someone who takes pleasure in sharing. If a person doesn't have the desire to share what they've learned, they simply can't do this. At some point, they'll get bored and give up. I mean, maybe it's because it's trendy or because it's popular, they might get into this field, including psychology. But sharing was a pleasure. Secondly, a request for help. For example, when I was talking to you, I understood immediately. So you have this dough, because even when I said it for Ms. Neslihan, I could sense that tone. I wish I could say one sentence to her. For example, this is a very subtle point. I've had this too ever since I was little. I wish I could have helped her. I wish I could have touched her life at some point. Here is another interesting piece of psychological data. If people come and confide in you regarding their personal troubles and difficult problems, instead of simply going and telling someone else, if people come and talk to you and after sharing with you, they say, I'm so glad I shared, you really helped me, thank you. That's also a piece of data for you. These are the building blocks. The desire to share, the desire to help, and the fact that people come to you on their own to talk about their problems, these form the foundation in this field. A beautiful building can be constructed on top of this foundation. But if you don't enjoy listening to people and people aren't coming to you to share these things anyway, if you don't have the desire to help someone or to share with others, if you don't have that desire, this just won't happen. For example, when I first started sharing on the internet, on Facebook, I didn't have any followers for 400 days. But despite that, even if there were only 3 people or 5 people or 10 people reading, for example, if 10 people read, if I read a story in a book, I would immediately share that story. They should hear it too. That mindset is exactly what brought me here today. If you have these qualities, it means you are on the right path.
Thank you.
Next is Mrs. Zumrut.
Hello. I wish you a good evening and thank you. You have provided us with very valuable information. I live in England. Right now in England, I am receiving psychological counseling and counseling training. At the same time, I am also receiving one-on-one hypnotherapy training. I am currently halfway through this journey and I have started life coaching with you. And during this process, I have also applied for a few more trainings in Turkey. I know that psychological counseling and life coaching are very different things, very different. But as our friend just mentioned, the main goal is to be able to help others and first and foremost, to be able to help myself. That's exactly how I started hypnotherapy training in the first place. Because I received support from hypnotherapy for some very big traumatic things I experienced in myself, and I absolutely need to help everyone. I thought that I need to support everyone in this regard. First my own family, then my friends, and then everyone I know or don't know. I experienced a swallowing phobia for about 3 months and survived only on liquids. And with many methods I tried for this, I failed with those methods. I tried various medications and many different therapy methods. However, the only thing that truly helped me the most in the shortest amount of time was hypnotherapy. Shortly afterwards, I discovered just how deeply interested I was in the field of psychology, and I really wanted to learn much more about it. And now, exactly as you said, I am focusing on exploring human potential. As someone who thought I had learning difficulties throughout my life, I discovered after the age of 36 how much I was actually able to learn. I realized that I could go beyond my own potential. And last week in our psychological counseling class, we also covered Maslow's theory, which states that humans are beings who can surpass their own potential. There's just something that occasionally crosses my mind. Am I making a mistake by taking so many trainings at once? I mean, am I mixing things up too much, or can I turn this into something positive in the future? For me, actually, all of them. Can I provide a holistic benefit to the person sitting across from me by using all of them together? Or will I just end up mixing things up too much? Honestly, this makes me anxious.
I understand. First of all, it's wonderful that you're trying to improve yourself in so many different areas. This is a very admirable behavior. So congratulations. Thank you. Many different methods in this field. It's like a toolbox. For example, when a device is put in front of you and you're asked to open it, for some devices, you need a Phillips screwdriver, for others a flathead screwdriver, for some a drill, and for some you might need to break it open with a hammer. Each of these methods is like a tool in a toolbox. For some people, Milton Erickson's approach can be very helpful. For others, Virginia Satir's. For some, Gestalt therapy. For others, NLP. and for some, Jungian perspectives may be effective. That's why these are like the tools in a toolbox. Now, generally speaking, I advise beginners to start with the technique or method you desire the most. Learn that one first. Once you have grasped it, if you wish or if you feel it is insufficient, then move on to the others. But some people, due to their personality structure, can learn several things at the same time. You will be the one to know this about yourself. In other words, you will understand this yourself. Because if you say, I can connect all of these in my mind, and everything fits perfectly in my head, I link this to that and that to this. But if you say, no, these things confuse me, just when I'm about to focus on one, I end up focusing on another. In that case, just focus on one thing. But my general approach is, for example, a person might be interested in two instruments. They might say, I want to learn piano and guitar. What I say is, my approach is that you should first learn the piano, finish it. I mean, when I say finish, these things never really end anyway. Reach a level where you can play something, where you can even play for others. After that, I say move on to another one. That's my general approach. But ultimately, you'll make the best decision for yourself. All right?
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yes, let's continue with Gonka. We can't hear your voice. All right, then let's get back to you in a bit. For example, since the name just says iPhone, one moment, Gonka has joined. Yes.
Hello, teacher. Good evening. Welcome. Teacher, here's the thing. It was thanks to my cousin's efforts that I started life coaching. May God bless them. A couple of months ago, I went through a huge shock. I experienced a really big shock, teacher. I used to be very successful. I am Asim. I'm from Turkmenistan. I came to Turkey. I've been in Turkey for 9 years. Teacher, something like this happened to me. When I went through that shock, my mind was completely wiped out. Apparently, things like this happen in a person's life. I completely lost the ability to laugh, to speak, to react. Everything was gone, teacher. Can you imagine that? They put so much pressure on me. At that time, I didn't know what to do. I didn't even know if I should cry. I couldn't do anything at all. Then, as I said, my cousin was a huge support for me. She read your books. She is still continuing to read them. What I mean is, I need to start with myself first, teacher. The first step, how am I going to do it? To start with myself first, I asked something from you.
All right.
How can I start, teacher?
I understand. Thank you. First of all, get well soon.
Thank you. May God bless you.
All of us can have very different experiences in our lives. Yes, you have experienced this in a very radical way. I always think that we should start with ourselves first anyway. If your heart changes, the world changes. I always embrace this philosophy, not in Shems either. That's why you have already taken that step. Ask yourself all the questions here, all the questions we've conveyed, first for yourself. Don't think about applying them to someone else, but rather consider them for yourself. Take the questions shared today and each one of them. Spread them out over 2 weeks. Ask yourself and answer yourself. This will be the best way for you to start. All right. I will take one last question because my colleagues are also saying that our time is slowly running out. Yes, go ahead. I can't say because there is no name written.
I wonder if it's me, teacher.
Yes, it's you. Good.
Good evening to everyone. In 2023, I actually set out on this path with your book. And tonight, how it happened. I also had the chance to speak with you. I have a problem like this. Everyone around me tells me that I should pursue this path and move forward in this field. But I am a very excitable person, and to be honest, I am quite hesitant about social media. I mean, I'm not someone who shares a lot either. I'm not an active user either. So how am I supposed to progress on social media? This is actually the point that's holding me back. I can't get past this. And because I can't overcome it, I can't really move forward. What kind of path should I follow?
First of all, you can start like this. You don't necessarily have to record your own face or make videos of yourself. There are actually a lot of people who do this. You can choose an anonymous character for yourself. You can pick a character from history. You can come up with a new name. You can create a pseudonym. In the same way, you can create a visual. It could even be an anime style image. You can also do this using various AI tools, and you can just mention this too. And at first, you answer people's questions in that way.
Then
When you feel ready, you can make audio versions of this as a podcast. Thank you. Again, you can use a different name there. It's audio. After that, if you feel ready, you can move on to video. So start slowly, but just start. First, come up with a few character names for yourself and start the Q&A that way. The important thing is to get started. I already showed you the book. The book has already given you enough of a message. So go ahead and start as soon as possible. Then we can share it too.
all right, teacher, thank you. I wish everyone a good evening.
Let's also take a question from Serpil. A question. Your microphone is off. Yes, Serpil, we can't hear you. Yes. Hello? Yes, now we can hear you. It's gone again.
Hello?
Yes, it's back.
I'm so sorry. Good evening again. Good
Evening.
teacher, just a second now. Actually, I have a few questions, but I don't want to take up your time now.
It would be great if we could take just one.
How can we effectively maintain our ability to remain objective without becoming overly emotionally entangled within the story our client tells us? And maintain that objectivity? Teacher?
Then Gul, I'll take your question as well. Then I'll wrap up. The last question will be Gul's. Now, of course, this is also a bit related to our personality structure. Some personalities are able to empathize more with the other person, sometimes too much, and they are affected by their lives. First of all, as you listen to those stories, over time they will stop affecting you as harmfully as they did before. In fact, this is also called the third-year medical student syndrome. Third-year medical students, when they reach the third year and first start practicing on cadavers, they can have intense reactions, some even vomit, and there are even those who quit.
Yes.
Then gradually, as you are repeatedly exposed to it, there is actually a therapy method like this in psychology as well. You can read up a bit on exposure therapy, for example. For instance, you can look into exposure therapy. As you listen more, it will decrease.
Yes, another thing is that I empathize way too much. That's why I think this could be a bit of a problem. Me too, in this profession.
Let me continue giving you advice. My advice, look into this a little bit. As I said, research exposure therapy, look into exposure therapy. And you also need to change your perspective at this point. You need to remind yourself of this. I'm here right now to help them. And if I get caught up in that emotion together with them subconsciously, then I can't help them. For example, someone who goes to give first aid in a battle, if the person in front of them is injured, has a bullet wound, and they feel sorry for them, they can't help them. You need to stay calm there and focus on the thought of how you can help them. You need to focus on that question in your mind as well. How can I help? All right?
Thank you. Good
evening. Let's look at your problem. I'll take your question now, but you're muted.
Good evening, teacher. How are you?
Thank
you. Thank you. I'm fine. I mean, I first saw you in Cyprus. I even took a photo at your conference. But I started personal development with your books the very first morning, waking up at 5, making the bed first thing, and it was really tough. After I had COVID, since 2020, I have read all your books. And after your books, I studied numerology. I completed Quantum Drama Practitioner Level 2. As you said, I really love explaining everything. And of course, what I really want is to be an actor. Since I couldn't get into acting, I'm studying these things online. But I have one problem, teacher. When I explain something to someone, I even went to a psychotherapist for this, and I could never solve it. Especially, for example, no encounter is a coincidence. That German path is in your book. When I read about your friend having cancer, I get very emotional and cry. And just so you know, I will convey this to others as well. Good things, bad things, happy things. You wrote the story of 83-year-old Pembe. That's my story in there. A person cries once, but every time I read it over 3 days, that thing says it's never too late, not even after 3 days. I mean, after everyone dies. Every time I cry and I can't find a solution for this. Teacher, why do I get so emotional and cry like this? No matter what, I can't express good or bad things well. Even when I want to tell something to my children, I end up doing this at the level of crying.
We can feel your energy even from here. You are someone who experiences emotions intensely, and your feelings really come across to the person in front of you. Even your cheerfulness comes through to us, even from across the screen. First of all, you shouldn't see crying as a problem. He says that when the eyes cry, the soul smiles. Sufis. And if emotions need to be released, they are released. So it means they're still there. There are certain emotions from your past, some things you don't remember or aren't even aware of that you need to release, and those emotions are released when you cry. So, in that regard, let yourself go. Don't try to block it. Let yourself relax. Secondly, the advice I gave earlier also applies to you. If you find yourself being overly affected by these emotions, look into exposure therapy a bit. Other than that, for you as well, I recommend that you do this Sufi meditation. If you've already done it, follow the new one I'm about to share. For the other details beyond that, I would need to ask additional questions, but we don't have much time left for that now. But listen to today's lesson again and reflect on today's topics. But don't see this as a problem in terms of your energy. Your energy also feels really nice. I say the path is open for you. The path will reveal itself to you. Thank you. With that, I wish you all a good evening. Take good care of yourselves. I hope that one day somewhere we can meet face to face. Goodbye.